Number 5. Jeffrey Epstein. The deeply horrifying and incredibly far-reaching crimes of incredibly wealthy financier Jeffrey Epstein remain one of the most massive, highly explosive scandals in modern history, completely exposing the deeply terrifying intersection of immense wealth, massive political power, and systemic exploitation. For decades, Epstein aggressively used his massive fortune to meticulously cultivate an incredibly powerful network of high-profile friends, including global politicians, prominent royals, and massive celebrities. Behind the closed doors of his incredibly luxurious mansions in New York and Palm Beach, and his highly secluded private island in the Caribbean, he orchestrated an incredibly massive, highly sophisticated sex trafficking ring targeting vulnerable, underage girls. Despite a deeply controversial and highly lenient non-prosecution agreement in 2008 that allowed him to completely avoid serious jail time, the incredibly brave and relentless persistence of his numerous survivors finally led to his federal arrest on massive sex trafficking charges in July 2019. The entire world was completely shocked when Epstein was found dead in his heavily guarded Manhattan jail cell just a month later, a death officially ruled a suicide but heavily surrounded by massive, incredibly persistent conspiracy theories regarding his highly powerful associates trying to permanently silence him. Number 4. Robert Durst. The incredibly bizarre and deeply terrifying saga of Robert Durst, the incredibly wealthy heir to a massive New York real estate empire, is a highly disturbing story of immense privilege, deep paranoia, and multiple suspected murders spanning decades. The incredibly dark clouds surrounding Durst first began in 1982 when his young, beautiful wife, Kathy, completely vanished without a trace after a fiercely violent argument, leaving Durst as the primary, heavily suspected person of interest. 18 years later, as seasoned investigators aggressively reopened the highly publicized case, Durst's incredibly close friend and fierce confidant, Susan Berman, was found brutally executed with a single, highly precise gunshot to the back of the head in her Los Angeles home, presumably to prevent her from ever speaking to the police. Durst then completely fled, heavily disguising himself as a mute woman and renting a cheap apartment in Galveston, Texas. There, he brutally murdered and meticulously dismembered his elderly neighbor, Morris Black, aggressively dumping the body parts in Galveston Bay. Incredibly, Durst was famously acquitted of the Texas murder after highly expensive lawyers argued self-defense. However, his massive luck completely ran out when he accidentally confessed on a hot microphone while filming the highly acclaimed HBO documentary series The Jinx, finally leading to his conviction for Berman's murder in 2021. Number 3. John DuPont. The incredibly tragic and highly bizarre events that unfolded on the massive, extremely luxurious Foxcatcher farm estate perfectly illustrate the deeply terrifying consequences of immense wealth combined with severe, completely unchecked mental illness. John Eleuthère DuPont, an incredibly wealthy heir to the massive DuPont chemical fortune, aggressively fancied himself a highly respected sports patron and actively built a massive, state-of-the-art wrestling facility on his sprawling Pennsylvania estate to train the United States Olympic team. However, DuPont's behavior grew increasingly erratic, deeply paranoid, and highly dangerous. He frequently carried heavy firearms, aggressively drove tanks around the property, and falsely believed the trees were moving. Despite his deeply terrifying behavior, his immense wealth and heavy financial sponsorships effectively insulated him from any real consequences. The incredibly tragic climax occurred on January 26, 1996, when DuPont, completely unprovoked and deeply delusional, drove to the on-estate home of Dave Schultz, a highly beloved Olympic gold medalist wrestler. In front of Schultz's absolutely terrified wife, DuPont pulled out a heavy revolver and brutally shot Schultz 3 times, killing him instantly. The murder led to a massive, highly publicized 2-day armed standoff with heavily armed SWAT teams before the incredibly wealthy heir was finally captured and sentenced to prison. Number 2. Bernie Madoff. While not involving physical violence or murder, the incredibly massive and deeply devastating crimes of highly respected Wall Street financier Bernie Madoff represent the absolute largest, most devastating financial fraud in global history. For decades, Madoff completely charmed and heavily manipulated thousands of incredibly wealthy investors, massive charities, and prominent celebrities, aggressively promising them highly consistent, incredibly steady returns regardless of the volatile market conditions. In reality, his highly prestigious investment firm was nothing more than a massive, incredibly elaborate Ponzi scheme. He completely fabricated decades of heavy financial statements, aggressively using money from new, eager investors to pay off the older ones, while completely enriching himself and his family. The massive House of Cards illusion completely and violently shattered during the deeply severe 2008 global financial crisis, when massive amounts of terrified clients aggressively attempted to withdraw heavily over $7 billion at once. Madoff was forced to finally confess to his deeply shocked sons that the massive business was one big lie, revealing that an astonishing $65 billion had completely vanished. The incredibly devastating fallout ruined thousands of lives, forcing elderly retirees into extreme poverty and causing several tragic suicides, leading to Madoff receiving a massive 150-year prison sentence. Number 1. Elizabeth Holmes. The deeply shocking and highly publicized rise and massive, catastrophic fall of incredibly charismatic entrepreneur Elizabeth Holmes completely captivated and deeply terrified the Silicon Valley tech world. Dropping out of Stanford University at 19, Holmes aggressively founded Theranos, a massive medical testing startup that boldly claimed it would completely revolutionize the entire healthcare industry. She aggressively pitched a heavily guarded, supposedly state-of-the-art machine called the Edison, which she claimed could perform hundreds of highly complex medical tests using only a single, tiny drop of blood from a simple finger prick. Channeling the fierce persona of Steve Jobs, completely with black turtlenecks and an incredibly deep, highly affected voice, she aggressively raised nearly $1 billion from massive, high-profile investors and heavily partnered with massive pharmacy chains. However, the entire, highly secretive operation was a massive, incredibly dangerous fraud. The Edison machines completely failed to work accurately, and the company